you to everyone who's joining us tonight. Just want to mention that if you enjoy tonight's program, please feel free to become a member if you're not already, or make a donation to the museum by the link we're going to drop in the chat box. And that way you can help support us and our ability to continue providing quality educational programs like you'll see this evening. At least I think it's quality. But I really appreciate all of you joining us tonight for the debut of my program about women's history in McLean County, artists, advocates, acrobats, and more, women who made McLean County history. And this program has been a long time coming. I've been at the museum almost 16 years now, and we've regularly, especially the last couple of years, had requests for programs about women's history. And unfortunately, we've never had any, and that's a problem I've wanted to remedy for a long time. Sure, we have programs about individual women, but never a group such as you're going to hear about tonight. So I wanted to change that. And with 2020 being the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which granted white women the right to vote, I thought that would be the perfect time to debut such a program. But yeah, of course, 2020 had other ideas. And that program kind of got put on the back burner last year. But towards the end of last year, I had a renewed sense of urgency to make sure this program happened, and we received additional requests. And so here we are. There are so many women I could have included in this program, way more than just the 20 you're going to learn about tonight. And these are not the who's who of McLean County. They're women from all walks of life, and each of them has a unique story to tell. It's important to note why we don't oftentimes know a lot about women's history, especially women in lower economic brackets and minority groups. And it's usually when a woman gets married, she typically becomes, for example, Mrs. Tom Jones. A piece of her individual identity has been lost, especially when it comes to tracing women through newspaper articles. Second, typically women in high economic brackets were more often reported on in newspapers, and that is extremely limiting when doing research. And up to that point, women of color were hard to find in newspaper articles and historical documents because they'd been marginalized for so long. It is getting easier to find information on the women in more recent history, thanks to the digitization of historic documents and newspapers, such as newspapers.com. But we still have a long way to go. But tonight, I hope that this program on 20 such women helps shorten that distance and shed some light on our local women's history. So the first woman we're going to learn about tonight is Maria Eugenia von Elsner, who went by the stage name of Maria Litta. She was born in 1856 to Hugo and Amanda von Elsner. When Maria was young, it was recognized that she had an outstanding talent for music. Her father began training her, but later employed professional voice teachers to give her the achievement he had hoped for. Maria made her first public appearance when she was just 5 years old, singing "'Tis the Rose of Last Summer" in front of a group of volunteer Union soldiers in Springfield, Illinois in 1861. She stood alone and sang in a, quote, clear, sweet, and plaintive tones that brought a sudden stillness over her audience. When she was 14, Maria began studying vocal music in Cleveland, Ohio. Then, with the financial support of an arts patron, she traveled to Europe and continued her education in Paris, France in 1874. 4 years later, she made her debut in the Theatre des Italiens, taking the Italian surname Litta. At the time, Parisians had strong feelings about Germans due to France's defeat during the Franco-Prussian War. So she took the precaution to conceal her identity and her German roots and adopted the noble Italian family name Litta. Her performance was given rave reviews. In one review, it was stated, quote, ladies stood up in their boxes and burst their gloves clapping. Shortly after her Paris debut, Maria returned home to Bloomington in October 1878 after the close of the opera season. During her visit, she gave a concert at Durley Hall, located in downtown Bloomington, which was filled to capacity. At the end of the performance, she received a standing ovation, and it was said that her achievements in music was a triumph in which each and all of them, the audience, had a part. Maria continued to perform throughout the United States, and her reputation preceded her wherever she went. with her audiences expecting a great deal from her. Newspapers at the time called and declared that Maria had the reigning musical star of America. The European press called her the Queen of Song or the American Jenny Lind. And Jenny Lind was a renowned Swedish singer, so this was high praise. She eventually formed her own opera company in 1880, the Litta Concert Company. And it was managed by Henry Slayton of Chicago. At the end of her career, at the height of her career, the young singer was earning $75,000 a year, which is the equivalent of almost $2 million today. However, Maria's manager accepted more and more bookings to the point where she grew ill in the spring of 1883. But nevertheless, she followed through with all her commitments, which eventually took its toll, and Litta collapsed after a concert that summer in Michigan. Sadly, Maria Litta passed away from her illness in her mother's home in Bloomington at the young age of 27. Her many admirers in Bloomington raised funds to erect a monument in her honor. The monument, seen in the photo at the bottom of the screen, is located in Evergreen Memorial Cemetery, is made of Vermont granite, and includes a 17-foot, 5-inch shaft topped by a draped urn representing eternal life. And it remains there to this day. Our next woman, Sarah Raymond Fitzwilliams, was a community activist, pre-progressive educator and reformer, and leader in curriculum development. She was born in 1842 in Kendall County, Illinois. She was the daughter of Jonathan and Catherine Raymond. Like her parents, she was a staunch abolitionist. Her family home was a, quote, stop on the Underground Railroad in Kendall County. Later in life, Sarah wrote that she was accustomed from early childhood to seeing, quote, Black fugitives off and on at my father's residence until Lincoln's proclamation, which she's referring to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. She taught school in Kendall County for several terms before enrolling in Illinois State Normal University when she was 17 in the fall of 1862, and she graduated in 1866. 2 years later, she began teaching in Bloomington Public Schools. She first taught secondary primary grade at school number 5, which was located at Walnut and West Streets. Because of her success in teaching there, she was made principal of the school after just 1 year. Sarah remained there until 1873, when she was chosen to be principal of the high school, which she served for 1 year. During her tenure at school number 5, the issue of segregation in schools came to a head. Children of color could not attend school number 5. Instead, they had to attend the segregated school number 3 in the Bloomington School District, regardless of how far away it was from their homes. Sarah challenged the system and the courts by admitting students of color to school number 5, her school, not requiring that they walk to the more distant segregated school. A local judge passed judgment that because Bloomington Public Schools had provided the necessary buildings for school children in the city, the school board has the power to say where children should go. It would not be until 1874 when the Illinois State Supreme Court decided once and for all to outlaw school segregation. In 1874, Sarah was appointed superintendent of Bloomington Public Schools, and she had an uphill battle to prove that she was worthy of this position to members of the community, as she was the first woman superintendent of Bloomington schools. She found herself faced with many challenges during her tenure in office, in particular, opposition to a woman being superintendent. However, Sarah met this challenge head on and proved all of them wrong. Working with her close friend, Georgina Trotter, who was the first woman elected to the Bloomington Board of Education in 1875, the duo worked tirelessly to improve education for students in Bloomington Public Schools. Their efforts increased the number of classrooms in schools, shortened the course of study in high school, and assigned more courses to earlier grades, and almost completely eliminated corporal punishment. And by 1881, the school district's debt was completely gone. After 18 years of service to the community, she resigned her position, citing the need to assist family in Boston as her reason for leaving. Sarah Raymond School of Early Education, located in Bloomington, was named in her honor. Sarah Raymond Fitzwilliams was truly a woman ahead of her time, learning to dare and daring to lead. Georgina Trotter, as was mentioned, was a very good friend of Sarah Raymond Fitzwilliams. And Trotter was a dynamo of energy and a force to be reckoned with. She was born in 1836 in Drogheda, Ireland, to John and Anne Trotter. The Trotter family was Irish Protestant and belonged to an aristocratic clan of agriculturalists. In 1850, Georgina, her mother, and the rest of her siblings came to America, where her father and two siblings had already settled. The Trotter family was also affected by the famine, which plagued the whole of Ireland. As their tenants starved and crops failed, the family packed up and moved to the United States for better economic opportunities. The family eventually moved to Bloomington in the late 1850s or early 1860s. Georgina enlisted as a nurse in the Union Army upon the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. As a nurse, she escorted wounded Union soldiers to the South, from the South to the North on riverboats up and down the Mississippi River. After the war ended in 1865, she returned home and joined her brother John in his lumber, grain, and coal business, which he opened in 1866. Their lumber and coal yard, J. W. and G. Trotter Lumber and Grain Merchants, was located at 1302 West Market Street. Georgina had a shrewd talent for business and proved a very successful asset to the company. When her brother John passed away in February 1892, he left the entire business to Georgina over their brother James. Under her leadership, the company continued to thrive. Georgina's talent for business was sought out by other local businessmen. Note I said businessmen, who came to her for advice, establishing her ability as a woman capable to run a profitable company on her own. In 1875, Georgina became the first woman elected to the Bloomington Board of Education, even though as a woman, she did not have the right to vote. She served on the board for 18 years alongside Sarah Raymond, her close friend, who was superintendent of public schools in Bloomington. Because of Georgina's shrewd sense of business, she saved the school district a good deal of money in the construction of new buildings and the renovation of others. Her business sense also helped keep the school district out of debt during her tenure in office. Georgina and Sarah worked side by side to improve the lives of others in the community through their social and professional lives. One way they helped better the community was by helping develop Bloomington's public library, known as Withers Public Library, named after Sarah Withers, who donated the land in which the library was situated on. Georgina contributed funds to help construct the building and lend her business sense to the administration of the library. The library opened in 1887 on the corner of East and Washington Streets and remained there for 89 years. In 1977, a new public library opened on Olive Street in Bloomington. Today, there is a fountain dedicated to the Trotter family next to the Withers Library site, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. After she retired from the school board, Georgina devoted her attention to her lumber and coal business. Upon her death in 1904, the Pantograph called her, quote, one of the most remarkable women Bloomington has ever claimed as citizen. Dr. Maria Louise DePew Crothers is believed to be the first female physician in Bloomington. She established her own practice at a time when very few women had achieved that level of mastery in that profession. She was born in Indianapolis in 1833, and her family moved to Bloomington when she was 7. Little is known about Louise before her marriage to Dr. Eli Crothers in 1851. Eli Crothers was a doctor and earned a reputation as one of the most capable eye doctors around these parts. Louise and Eli had 9 children, only 4 of whom survived to adulthood, including their daughter Rachel, who we will discuss later. Louise's marriage to E.K., as he was often called, fostered her own interest in medicine. When she was 40, Louise began to educate herself by reading Gray's Anatomy and assisting her husband in his practice. She began her studies at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia from 1877 to 1878. At this time, women could not attend medical school with men and had their own medical schools, which were few and far between in the United States. She continued additional studies at Women's Medical College of Chicago, and also took special courses in gynecological medicine at Rush Medical School in Chicago as well. When she returned to Bloomington, Dr. Louise Crothers established a successful practice apart from her husband's, earning the reputation as the acknowledged leading lady physician of Central Illinois, but reportedly met with a good deal of opposition in pursuit of her professional endeavors. In 1887, the doctors Crothers, as they were sometimes called, moved to a residence at 414 East Jefferson Street. Louise kept an office at the family home where she treated diseases of women and children and handled obstetric cases. Louise's experience in gynecology and obstetrics made her invaluable at a time when such knowledge was deemed a taboo topic. As her husband Eli's health continued to decline due to diabetes, she took on a larger part of the responsibilities in the practice, aiding her husband very materially in his office. When her husband died in the spring of 1893, after losing his battle with diabetes, Louise took over her husband's practice. The last 4 years of her professional career was spent as the first attending physician of the Women's Industrial Home, later renamed the Girls Industrial Home. The home was first located in a rented house at 807 West Market Street, which today is the site of Mount Pisgah Baptist Church and was once home to Edwards Public School, which you can see in the picture here. Upon her death in 1920, the Pantograph remembered her as being, quote, devoted to her home and family, and her heart and soul were dedicated to the welfare of her children. Her death marks the passing of one of the city's most lovable characters, a woman whose memory will be cherished wherever she was known. Lucy Orme Morgan was born in Bloomington in 1858 to William and Nanny Orme. Not much is known about Lucy's life before she married. She attended and graduated from the Monticello Ladies Seminary, a finishing school near Godfrey, Illinois, in 1877, and was salutatorian of her class. 3 years after graduating, she married Edward R. Morgan in 1880 in Bloomington. They had 3 children, Richard, Nan, and Frank. Lucy was very active in the community. Her passion was social service, and she hoped to help others, especially young people, to become independent and successful. She was also a firm believer in suffrage. Among the organizations she belonged to, she was a charter member of the McLean County chapter of the American Red Cross, a member of the Bureau of Social Services, a history club, and served on the Brokaw Hospital Board. Lucy was also a member and co-founder of the Bloomington Women's Club, founded in 1897 and still exists today. But Lucy's passion and what would become the most distinguishable effort of her life was the Girls' Industrial Home. The home, first known as the Women's Industrial Home of McLean County, was founded in 1889. The board of the home first rented a house located at 807 West Market Street, which is where Dr. Louise Crothers served on the home's board, an attending physician. The industrial home was not a home for delinquent children. Rather, it was a home for dependent white children who were neglected and had no one to care for them. The home was a place where they could have both a place to live and a place to get some useful education. The girls would be taught useful things to prepare them for a life of independence when they were of age. It is not exactly known why Lucy became involved with the home, but it's most likely due to her philanthropic work with the Women's Club of Bloomington. She was elected board president of the home in 1906. She helped the home grow and thrive, leading several successful campaigns to expand and improve the home and to continue to meet the needs of residents. In August of 1929, the board of the home honored Lucy for her 24 years as president of the board and her faithful service to the Girls' Industrial Home by renaming it the Lucy Orme Morgan Home. In 1939, Lucy declined re-election as president of the board of the home. She'd served for president for 33 years and most likely felt that she had served long enough and felt comfortable in the fact that the home would continue to flourish without her. Because of her service to the home and the community, she was made a president emeritus for life. Even though she no longer was president of the board, the home was never far from her mind. She continued to work at the home another 3 years before her own declining health prohibited her from continuing. And to note, the home continued to flourish long after Lucy's death. After several mergers over the years, the home still exists today as Children's Home and Aid and continues to be located on State Street in Bloomington. Another woman who was like a mother to so many children in Bloomington was Louise Davis Calimese. Louise and her husband Napoleon spent almost 30 years of their lives as matron and superintendent of the McLean County Home for Colored Children. The couple cared for children as if they were their own and made the institution into a home as best they could. Louise Davis Calimese was born in 1895 in Louisiana, Missouri, to Charles and Clarissa Davis. Unfortunately, we don't know much about Louise before her marriage to Napoleon Calimese. The couple was married in 1920 in Normal, and they had 2 children, John and Betty. Louise and Napoleon became matron and superintendent of the home, which was later renamed the Booker T. Washington Home in 1942. They came to the home in 1927. The home was located at 1203 West Moulton Street, which today is MacArthur Avenue, and was created in 1918 for orphaned or indigent children of color, ages 6 to 16 in McLean County at that time. Before this, the only option for children of color in Bloomington was the Soldiers and Sailors Orphans Home, better known today as the Illinois Soldiers and Sailors Children's School. But to be eligible for entry in that institution, you had to be a child of a veteran. So that left many children of color in need and no place to go in downstate Illinois. For many years, this was the only home for African-American children outside the city of Chicago to be licensed by the state of Illinois. The home served both McLean and Peoria counties. In the hope of creating a true home environment, children of the home were expected to contribute to the upkeep of the house by doing chores. Louise, who liked to sew herself, taught the girls to sew when they reached the age of 10. Louise and Napoleon also facilitated hobby building programs for the children, including birdhouse building for the boys and piano lessons for everyone. Louise also never forgot a child's birthday. Each child received a birthday gift, and during the monthly birthday table, a birthday cake with candles was supplied by various community groups. Excuse me. Louise knew the importance of her role and provided the children a shoulder to cry on and support through any problem that came through adolescence. She was always there for her charges to offer, quote, motherly advice for character and personality development. Louise strived to help the children discern the difference between actual racial prejudice and deserved discipline. In instances that the children would come home from school saying that the teacher did not like them because of the color of their skin, Louise stated that, quote, 9 times out of 10, the child has done something it shouldn't and deserved any reprimand that it received. However, this does not suggest that children did not experience prejudice in their lives. Louise would try to instill in the child a desire and a willingness to turn the other cheek and thus rise above the insult by sheer superiority and understanding and tolerance. As an African-American woman herself, she would have known the struggles that came with the racism that was so prevalent at this time. She aimed to prevent any resentment from forming within those children. The Calimeses remained at the home for almost 30 years, retiring in 1957. It was stated that their cooperation with the board and their outstanding ability in handling children who have endeared them to all with whom they work. To their credit, many of the children who left the home and gone out into the world never failed to express their appreciation for the splendid training Louise and Napoleon gave them to meet the problems of the world. The city of Bloomington boasts of many talented female artists at the turn of the 20th century. Emily Howard was one of those women. She dedicated her life to not only establishing her artistic identity, but to helping people understand that art has its positive influence, not only in developing character, but in making life better and more useful. And the reason why you're seeing a picture of Emily's work here is because there is no known photograph for Emily Howard, which is a problem we run into more often with lots of people in the early days. Emily was one of 7 children born to missionary parents, Reverend Hosea and Teresa Howard in Burma, today known as the country of Myanmar, in 1836. When Emily was about 16 years old, the family left Burma on account of her parents' poor health. After living in Massachusetts and New York for several years, where she taught music and painting, the family moved to Bloomington in 1858. Emily resumed teaching music, giving lessons in piano, melodeon, organ, and voice cultivation to young women. By 1869, she taught music, French, drawing, and painting at the Bloomington Female Seminary, operated by Reverend Robert Conover, which was considered one of the prominent educational institutions in Bloomington of the day. Emily showed a talent for painting at an early age, and her skills developed with remarkable success. She continued to hone her skills throughout her life. She also traveled to the East Coast and Chicago to refresh herself in a new atmosphere and take a few lessons from eminent artists. She preferred painting still lifes, focusing on fruit and flowers, and landscapes, but did dabble in paintings that included human figures too. Her superior skills as an art teacher were recognized and affirmed when she was hired by Illinois Wesleyan University in 1883 to teach guitar. By 1891, she was made director of the School of Painting and was an instructor of landscape and still life in oil in the Wilson College of Art at Illinois Wesleyan. Her work could be found displayed all over the city of Bloomington and at art shows throughout the region. During an 1883 display at the Chicago Art Store on Front Street in Bloomington, it was noted that the pieces she displayed included several landscape and floral pieces, 2 figure pieces, a Limoges, which is on porcelain, and 3 paintings on velvet. Howard taught this new method of painting on velvet, which became quite popular at the time. She also showed her art in Peoria in May of 1885 at the 6th Annual Central Illinois Union Exhibit. Admirers of her work one holiday season in Bloomington stated that it strikes one looking for a beautiful Christmas present that one of these paintings is as appropriate and as acceptable as could be found. Many people yearly buy the work of foreign artists, while if they had seen Miss Howard's, they would have preferred to recognize and encourage home talent instead. Sadly, as Emily grew older, her eyesight began to fail her. Prior to her move to Louisville, Kentucky to live with her sister in 1909, an attempt to preserve her sight through surgery failed, leaving Emily completely blind at the end of her life. However, though a tragic condition for an artist, it was said that she was always cheerful in spite of her affliction. The museum is fortunate to have 2 of Howard's paintings that you have seen in this slideshow in its collection, both still lifes and fruit. Both of these paintings were displayed at the Stevenson House, the boyhood home of former governor of Illinois and U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai E. Stevenson II, which the home is located at 1316 East Washington Street in Bloomington. Carolyn Schertz Geneva wanted to help people. And when she was about 19 years old, she decided she wanted to become a nurse. She was born in 1892 in Hudson, Illinois, and she was the daughter of David and Carrie Schertz. By 1900, the family had moved to Normal, but little else is known about her life before she entered Brokaw Nursing School. She entered the Brokaw Nursing School around 1911, and the school was geared towards women who were interested in becoming professional nurses. After completing the 3-year curriculum and graduating, Carolyn was made the head nurse for the surgical department at Brokaw Hospital in 1914. Her duties as head nurse would have entailed overseeing the preparations before, during, and after surgery. 3 years later, Carolyn began working at the recently founded Bloomington chapter of the American Red Cross. There, she taught classes in surgical dressing and was in charge of training new aid workers. Additionally, she also assisted in local disaster relief, including being sent to Charleston and Mattoon, Illinois, after a deadly tornado hit the area. In August 1917, she answered the call of duty and joined an Army medical unit during World War I. She and 2 other nurses from Brokaw Hospital joined up and went to Springfield for training. Her unit was made up of 12 doctors, 25 nurses, and 50 enlisted men. They were eventually sent to Nova Scotia, Canada, to form a convoy with Canadian ships and head to England. The journey was harrowing. Carolyn recalled that they got into, quote, submarine trouble 2 days before they landed in Liverpool, England. After boarding a train for London, her train was stopped because of an air raid. Later, Carolyn was put in charge of surgery tents at Knotty Ash on England's west coast. Her unit was stationed there for 6 months in tents before we were moved into buildings. Unfortunately, Carolyn, like so many other servicemen and women, contracted the flu as a result of the flu pandemic of 1918 and 1919. And like many who contracted the flu, it turned into pneumonia. After suffering from both of these illnesses, she was left with a heart condition, which forced the Army to relieve her of duty. And she was officially discharged from the military on August 4th, 1919. Back in Bloomington, Carolyn joined the newly formed Louis E. Davis Post Number 56 of the American Legion on September 19th, 1919. Carolyn, along with other war nurses, were among the first members to join. In 1921, she married fellow veteran William B. Geneva of Bloomington, and they had 2 daughters. When the World War II broke out, she went back to work as a nurse at Brokaw Hospital, where she continued to work off and on for 20 years as house supervisor, overseeing the operations and nurses of the Brokaw Nursing Home. She was also the overwhelming choice to receive the first Employee of the Year award for Brokaw Hospital in August of 1964, and she retired from her long nursing career in the late 1960s. Angeline Vernon Milner, Angie as she was known to most, had a lifelong love of literature, books, and reading. She was born in 1856 to John and Angeline Milner in Bloomington. Angie was a frail girl and was educated at home by her mother, who was a former governess and who felt the quality of public schools at that time was unacceptable. Angie learned the alphabet by the time she was 2 and could read by age 4. She attended private school until age 11 and then attended Bloomington High School, but never graduated. Her affiliation with Illinois State Normal University began with her working in the Illinois State Library of Natural History that was housed on the ISNU campus. It was her job to mount botanical specimens and catalog books. While working at that library, Angie began studying library science on her own. And then in 1889, President Edwin Hewitt was given permission by the board of ISNU to combine several libraries of books on campus and hire a full-time librarian. Angie was recommended and officially hired in 1890 to catalog several thousand books ISNU owned, which was scattered throughout different parts of campus. She was the first full-time librarian at the university. She began her tenure as a librarian with only 1 assistant. By the end of her career, she had 4 assistants and many students assigned to help her manage over 40,000 volumes and as many periodicals and pamphlets. She cataloged and wrote call numbers on each and every volume by hand. Angie was also a founding member of the Illinois branch of the American Library Association and served as its president. Having developed a knowledge for library science through experience and self-study, she wrote numerous professional articles and gave many presentations. Because all faculty members required their students to use the library, she developed lessons so that students could become familiar with the library and put it to better use. Angie's passion for library science drew national attention and shaped the curriculum of the university. She was well known to faculty and students and went out of her way to be service to them. Angie was always helpful to students and would spend hours hunting down a reference needed for a thesis. However, she had no patience for those who waited until the last minute to seek out her help, and she would lecture them about not getting an earlier start on their research. She was familiarly called Aunt Angie by many of the students on campus. Angie insisted on quiet in her library. She was shrewd and quick-witted and always knew what a student wanted. Some called her outspoken. She was not, however, sympathetic to women's suffrage, but considered it her, quote, religious duty to vote when the privilege came into being. She worked for 38 years at the library until ill health ill health forced her retirement in 1927. When Angie finished her career, the library was in North Hall. In 1940, what is now known as Williams Hall was completed and dedicated as Milner Library in her honor. The library moved to its present location in 1976. Many of the older books that had remained in Williams Hall on the third floor were now moved to the new ISU archives in North Normal. Luana Brown Sanders Clark was a woman of great pride, independence, and intelligence. Born in 1892 to William and Laura Brown in Western Kentucky, Luana Brown Sanders Clark lived to be 100, spending nearly her entire adult life in Bloomington Normal. Her mother died when she was 5, leaving her to be raised by her father and an older sister. By 1910, Anna was living with her sister and sister's family in Olmsted, Illinois, which is in southern Illinois. She attended school until the 8th grade, and it was not until 1936, when she was 44, that she officially received her high school diploma while living in Normal. In 1916, at the age of 24, she boarded a train for Bloomington to take a housekeeping job with the Kitchnell family that a friend had arranged for her. This was the typical type of work at the time for many African Americans. It was very limited options for them. She worked for them until her marriage to Ike Sanders in 1917. Ike Sanders was a successful Black businessman in Bloomington. He owned and operated the Working Man's Club of the city of Bloomington, located at 1101 West Washington Street. When she married Ike, they became equal partners in the business. The Working Man's Club operated 7 days a week, 7 a.m. to midnight. The club provided rooms, recreation, and food for the working man. The establishment served white, Black, and Latino clientele, many of whom worked in the coal mine or the Chicago-Knowlton Railroad shops on Bloomington's west side. Ike managed the pool hall, the barber shop, the drinks, and the finances, and Anna controlled the restaurant, which consisted of 3 small tables. Anna cooked and served customers whenever anyone came in, including at breakfast time. After the business was forced to close in 1919, Anna worked at A. Livingston and Sons department store as a woman's restroom attendant until 1931. She then returned to housekeeping for a few years, and by 1936, she began a 22-year career working at the Illinois Soldiers and Sailors Children's School, retiring in 1958. During that same time she was at the ISSCS, she opened up her home on University Street in Normal to board Black students attending Illinois State Normal University. At that time, Black students who attended ISNU were not allowed to live in the dormitories or eat on-campus cafeterias until the 1950s. She housed up to 8 students at a time, mostly young men, during her boarding house career. The young men that stayed with Anna managed themselves. They shopped, cooked, cleaned according to a rotating schedule that they hung over the stove. Anna's support provided the young men with an opportunity to earn an education, an opportunity that they most likely would not have had otherwise. Many of these young men kept in touch with her long after they graduated and made successful careers for themselves. Retirement did not slow Anna down. In fact, she called it the best part of her life. She was able to travel, visited almost every state in the nation. She was a member of several civic and social organizations, including Mount Pisgah Baptist Church, the Order of the Eastern Star, and the 3 Seas Club. She was also a founding member of the Bloomington Normal Black History Project in 1984. Elizabeth Irons Folsom Fox, despite being born with poor eyesight and eventually going blind, Lizzie did not let this disability stop her from having a long and successful career as a writer. Elizabeth Irons Folsom Fox was born in about 1862 in Peoria to Charles and Eddie Irons. She was their only child, and her parents moved the family to Bloomington when she was a young girl. She graduated from Bloomington High School in 1879. Unfortunately, Lizzie had born with poor eyesight. Her mother and maternal grandparents had both battled blindness as well. This problem would only worsen throughout the rest of her life, although at the time, doctors assured her her condition would not get worse. After her first marriage ended for unknown reasons, to support herself and her invalid mother, Lizzie began working at the Pantograph newspaper as a court reporter. Her job as a court reporter was not an easy one, especially for a woman. The job entailed sitting through days of trials. She often had to go out at 3 a.m. in the morning to get the details of a murder case, or try to catch a cab, or walk in the middle of the night to report on a fire miles away from her home at the center of town. But Lizzie often said that these years were, quote, a necessary foundation for her writing to develop in the years to come. As her eyesight continued to deteriorate, however, she felt less able to do her job as a court reporter and resigned after 14 years. But that was not the end of her writing career. Rather, it's just the beginning of her writing short stories and novels. Lizzie often recounted that she had written her first short story while traveling to Chicago by train in 1914. An idea struck her during the journey, and she put it to paper. When she arrived in Chicago, she sent it off to Munsey's Magazine in New York City, which is an all-fictional monthly publication, and they bought it. She had no serious expectation of getting the story published, only thought of as a way to pass time on the train ride. Munsey sent her a check, and with that check was a request for more stories. Her next 8 stories were sold to that magazine. It was after this she decided to go to New York City and try her luck at establishing a writing career. Even though her eyesight was very bad when she arrived in New York, it did not stop her from her new chosen career. And she did not just write one type of story. She published stories on a variety of topics. She described that the way she wrote as one which uses real people with unusual personalities in a real setting, but the rest was fictional. She even used court cases which she had reported on during her time with the Pantograph as inspiration for some of her stories. Furthermore, she wrote the last paragraph of her story first, and when the story germ arrived, the opening paragraph arrived with it. She was very persistent in getting publishers to review her stories and publish them. One of her stories was rejected 35 times before it was finally published by a magazine who'd already rejected it. In the first 5 years of her career as a fiction writer, she published about 60 short stories. The highlight of her career came in 1924 when she won an O. Henry Award for her short story, Towers of Fame, which appeared in the August 1923 edition of McClure's magazine. Her award made headlines across the country, and all her friends and family back in Bloomington took great pride in her achievement. Sadly, the last few years of her life were spent in total blindness, and she was not able to do much writing. Florence Risser Funk was one of McLean County's most renowned suffragists and society women. She was born in 1871 in Bloomington to Abraham and Mary Risser. When Florence was 6 years old, her father moved the family to Chicago, hoping that the larger city setting would be good for his saddle business. After completing her public education, she enrolled in Vassar College in 1890. Florence married childhood sweetheart Frank Funk, yes, one of those Funks, in 1895. She and Frank settled in Bloomington and had 3 children, Mary, Benjamin II, and Florence. She became involved in a variety of social and cultural activities in Bloomington, including the History and Art Club, the Amateur Musical Club, and the Margaret Fuller Literary Club. But her true calling was community betterment, and she became involved with the YWCA and Women's Club. Sometime after 1910, she developed a keen interest in women's suffrage movement. Funk was a member of the Illinois Equal Suffrage Association and worked aggressively to press the Illinois General Assembly into passing the Presidential and Municipal Voting Act. Women like Funk prevailed, and Governor Doonan signed the bill into law in 1913. Illinois was the first state east of the Mississippi River to give women limited voting rights. Now, Florence could direct her work to the national level. She was very active in politics. In addition to supporting her husband Frank's political aspirations, she was an ardent supporter of Republican candidate for President of the United States, Charles Evan Hughes, in the 1916 election. Hughes was a supporter of suffrage and won a lot of support from women. Florence became the Illinois state organizer for women's branch of the Hughes Alliance. She helped organize women's Republican clubs, including local Hughes clubs throughout central Illinois. And thanks to efforts by Florence and the Hughes Alliance, Hughes carried Illinois, but sadly was defeated by Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson at the national level. Outside of her political activities, Florence answered the call of duty in 1917 during World War I. She did her part to support the war effort at home by serving on the State Committee of the Women's Council of National Defense, which mobilized women for work on the home front and helped raise funds through Liberty Loan campaigns to fund the war. Florence was a multitasker. She tirelessly supported the war effort, but far from abandoned her suffrage work. She and other members of the Illinois Women's Suffrage Association continued to meet and discuss efforts to pass the suffrage amendment, and their efforts paid off, with white women winning the right to vote in all elections passed with the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1920. Illinois was one of the first states to ratify the amendment, owing in part to Florence Funk's efforts. Florence was part of a suffrage delegation that was in Springfield on June 9th when ratification of the amendment was brought to the General Assembly for the vote. It is unfortunate that Florence's opportunity to enjoy the nationally won franchise for women lasted only 3 years, as she passed away in 1923. However, she did live to see the first woman elected to serve in the Illinois House of Representatives, Lottie Holman O'Neill from Downers Grove, who was elected in 1922. Speaking of politicians, probably one of the most well-known early female politicians in Illinois was Florence Fifer Bohrer, who was no stranger to politics. She was born in 1877 into a political family in Bloomington, Illinois. She was the youngest child of Joseph W. Private Joe Fifer and Gertrude Fifer. While her father served as governor of Illinois from 1888 to 1892, Florence spent time in her father's office, curled up in a large chair, listening to her father and his personal friends and advisors discuss political issues about the running of the state. Florence was fond of their arguments regarding policy. Perhaps it was this setting that her interest in politics was born. After completing her education, she married Jacob Bohrer in 1898, and the couple had 2 children, Joseph and Gertrude. Florence felt it was her duty as a good mother to, quote, push out the walls of her home into the community. The wise mother would do whatever necessary to see that good ordinances and laws were adopted to provide a safe environment in which her children may live. She first directed her energies toward local issues involving education, public health, and welfare, in particular for women and children. She played an instrumental role in the success of the McLean County Anti-Tuberculosis Society and the opening of Fairview Sanitarium in 1919. She also helped form a Mothers Club, served on the board of the Girls Industrial Home, and played an active role in the board of the Amateur Musical Club, among other philanthropic activities. She was a major figure in the national fight for women's right to vote. On January 24th, 1924, her 47th birthday, a group of local women surprised Florence with a proposition that she should run for public office. Although the whole idea seemed preposterous to her, she eventually came around and began her campaign for the Illinois State Senate. After winning the general election in 1924, thanks to support from both Democratic and Republican women, Florence declared, "Women have not come into politics to represent a new interest in the political field, but rather to add their voices to the groups which already exist in other social and economic life." She did not take her new responsibilities lightly. One of her first bills introduced by Florence was the Dance Hall Bill, which provided for counties to restrict the operation of dance halls and required children under the age of 16 to be escorted by parents or guardians. Florence is also responsible for the bill that created the state park system in Illinois and introducing the law that provides for payment of all property taxes in 2 installments, which is still the same today. And for the act providing for permanent care for all children of Illinois that are disabled. Re-elected in 1928, Bohrer had a productive 8-year tenure in the Senate, earning a reputation as an advocate for state charitable institutions and helping to overhaul child welfare laws. Unfortunately, she was defeated for a third term by her Democratic opponent in 1932, but that did not stop her from helping people. When she returned home to McLean County, she took the unpaid chairmanship of the McLean County Emergency Relief Office from 1933 to 1934. She worked with people who had lost their savings due to the Depression, were jobless or ill. It was her responsibility to see that some 15,000 people in the county were given assistance. For her work in the Senate and during the employment crisis, she was presented with the Community Service Award in 1934. She was truly a remarkable woman, and because of her service to the citizens of Illinois, she made the state a better place to live. Quote, she stood courageously for whatever she believed to be right, regardless of race or creed. Sister Mary Antona Ebo was a well-behaved woman who did make history as one of the Sisters of Selma who marched for voting rights for African Americans in 1965. She was born Elizabeth Louise, better known as Betty Lou, Ebo in 1924, one of 3 children born to Daniel and Louise Ebo. In 1930, after her mother died suddenly and her father lost his job during the Great Depression and could no longer care for the children, Betty and her 2 siblings became wards of the county and were placed at the McLean County Home for Colored Children. She lived there off and on until 1942. Though raised Baptist, Ebo was drawn to Catholicism during 2 extended hospital stays in her adolescent years. She soon was received into the Catholic Church. However, because of her conversion, she was barred from returning to the McLean County Home for Colored Children by its board of directors. Arrangements were made for her to attend Holy Trinity High School so she could complete her education. She graduated in 1944, the school's first Black student and graduate. After graduation, Betty applied to Bloomington's St. Joseph School of Nursing, but was denied entrance due to the color of her skin. Other schools refused her admission as well because she was Black. Finally, she was accepted by a new school, St. Mary's Infirmary School of Nursing for Negroes in St. Louis. This was the nation's first and only Black Catholic nursing school at the time. 2 years later, the Sisters of St. Mary's decided they would accept Black novices, and Betty became one of the first Black nuns, taking the name Sister Mary Antona in honor of the nun who taught her algebra and geometry at Holy Trinity. She took her first 2 vows in 1947 and served with the Franciscan Sisters at St. Mary's for 71 years. Now, the picture on the left-hand side here looks very familiar. She did live at the home when Louise and Napoleon Calimese were running the home. So this is her right here, and that is Napoleon in the back. And then we saw the full picture earlier where Louise is standing in the corner, and her siblings are also in this picture as well. So it's one of those kind of things in history that you just get excited about when you find the picture and can make those connections between people that you learn about. While she was working as director of medical records at St. Mary's Infirmary in 1965, she learned about Bloody Sunday, the Voters' Rights March led by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. on March 7, 1965 in Selma, Alabama, that turned violent when white supremacists violently attacked the peaceful marchers. She joined an interfaith contingent from St. Louis that answered Dr. King's call for religious leaders to come to Selma. Her group arrived on the morning of March 10th, 1965. Terrified but determined, she was at the front of the group of demonstrators that day. They were stopped by city officials just 1 block into the march. When reporters began asking questions, Sister Antona was pushed by her fellow marchers to respond. She did so with strength of character, stating, quote, "I am a Negro and very proud. I feel it a privilege to be here today. I might say that yesterday, being a Negro, I voted, and I'd like to come here today and today say that every citizen, Negro as well as white, should be given the right to vote. That's why I'm here today." Her story was shared in the 2006 PBS documentary, Sisters of Selma, Bearing Witness for Change. At the age of 41, Sister Antona found her second calling as a spokesperson for the civil rights movement. In 1968, she helped found the National Black Sisters Conference, whose members committed themselves to moral fortitude to confront racism on a daily basis where you are at that moment. In 1989, the organization recognized her contributions and awarded Sister Antona the Harriet Tubman Award for leadership and described her as being called to be a Moses to the people. She remained vocal about voting rights, not just for African Americans, but all Americans the rest of her life. She had also been vocal about the present day racism and injustice that is seen in substandard educational opportunities for minorities and the recent shootings of unarmed Black youth until her death in 2017. Rachel Crothers was a playwright and theatrical director known for her well-crafted plays that often dealt with feminist themes. She was born in 1878, the youngest of 9 children born to Dr. E.K. and Maria Louise Crothers. Like I mentioned before, Louise is recognized as Bloomington's first female physician. That role her mother held dominated Rachel's youth and influenced the themes of the plays she would craft later in her life. Rachel developed an early love for theater and play acting while playing with dolls at her mother's knee. She traveled with her mother, Louise, while Louise attended medical school because Rachel was too young to stay at home. At the age of 12, she wrote the elaborately titled Every Cloud Has a Silver Lining or The Ruined Merchant, a 5-act play performed at her friend's house by invitation only. She attended elocution school in Boston, Massachusetts, and after earning a certificate in 1892, returned to Bloomington to teach the same subject from her parents' home on East Jefferson Street. Rachel also attended and graduated from Illinois State Normal University and was an active member of the Bloomington Dramatic Club. However, her parents did not approve of the theater, calling it, quote, an abomination aimed to entice young feet in the ways of sin. But since her father had passed away 5 years before, she received permission to leave Bloomington for the bright lights of New York City and its theater scene in 1896 or 1897. She eventually found success as an actor and then a writer and director. Near the turn of the century, Crothers was writing her own 1-act plays and full plays and started getting attention. Her big break came in 1906 when, at the age of 28, her first production of 3 of Us was produced and enjoyed a 277 performance run at Madison Square Garden. It was a huge success, even transferring to London in 1908. Within a decade, she was the nation's foremost female playwright. At a time when farce and melodrama dominated the stage, she favored the social problem drama, which dealt with the interplay of ideas, realistic characters, natural dialogue, and commonplace settings. Many of Rachel's plays focused on the modern woman amid the social upheaval of a rapidly changing society and how women were viewed. Quote, if you want to see the sign of the times, watch women, Crothers said in 1912. Their evolution is the most important thing in modern life. She wrote 37 plays, 24 of them being produced on Broadway. Many of her plays were successfully adapted to the silver screen, such as 1940 Susan and God, starring Joan Crawford. In 1939, she received the Chi Omega Sorority National Achievement Award from Eleanor Roosevelt. This award was given annually to an American woman of notable accomplishment in the professions, public affairs, art, letters, business and finance, or education. She was also a winner of a Pulitzer Drama Award. Crothers broke new ground by directing, staging, and casting most of her own plays. She also directed several plays written by others. Although little known today, Rachel Crothers is generally recognized as the most successful and prolific women dramatist on Broadway, writing in the first part of the 20th century. Annie Mae Christian was a fiercely independent woman who was not afraid to be on her own. She knew the value of community and hard work, had to support the one she grew up in. She was born in 1866 to Matthew and Elizabeth Christian in Decatur. When Mae was about 10 years old, she and her family moved to Bloomington and settled in a house at 509 East Front Street, which still stands today. Mae was an excellent student and received her education in Bloomington Public Schools. She was also a talented performer and took a great interest in music. She took lessons in both singing and piano and gave her first piano public performance in 1883. In 1895, she became involved in several clubs, including the History Club and the Women's Club. The organization that became her true passion was the Amateur Musical Club, which she joined in 1897. This club was for women. Men can join later as associate members, as a way to help citizens of Bloomington Normal experience music and culture. The club accomplished this primarily through cultivating local musical talent and hosting performances for local musicians. Later, as the club grew, it began booking famous musicians to perform in Bloomington as another way to introduce residents to a variety of musical experiences. May's involvement in the AMC grew over time. By 1910, she was president. She led the club for 12 years through some of its most illustrious years. While she was president, membership reached a peak of almost 2,000. This growth in membership allowed for more sponsorship of celebrity artist and orchestra performances, and May herself put together a list of the most notable performances put on by a club during her lifetime, 25 of which occurred while she was president. One of the most notable events of her presidency was the homecoming concert of local opera singer Minnie Saltzman Stevens in November 10th of 1910. A former member of the Amateur Musical Club, Saltzman Stevens left Bloomington 6 years prior to study voice and perform in Europe. The return of a local talent who found such success made the event one to remember. During World War I, the AMC did much to contribute to the war effort despite a dip in membership. The club purchased war bonds and stamps, made contributions to the Red Cross, and also used music to support the war effort by holding benefit concerts and sponsoring community sings. After stepping down as president in 1923, she continued to be active in the club for a few more years, mainly as a member of the board. But because of her service to the AMC, she was made a lifetime member. May Christian was a force in the Bloomington community all 74 years of her life, and by her own admission, was always too independent for her time. Another independent woman was Clara Louise Kessler, Louise as she was known to most, who had a lifelong interest in books, songs, and children. She was born in 1893 in Warren, Illinois, one of 3 children born to Samuel and Martha Kessler. Her family moved to Bloomington Normal in 1897 because her parents wanted better educational opportunities for their children. She graduated from Bloomington High School in 1910, and it was in high school where her creativity began to blossom. Louise graduated from ISNU and became a kindergarten teacher at the Day Nursery and Settlement Association. In 1919, she left that career as a kindergarten teacher and began the next chapter of her life, that of the children's librarian at Withers Public Library. Louise did much in her 33 years at Withers Public Library, not only for her children patrons, but the entire community. She created and implemented a wide range of programs that appealed to many people, especially children. The diversity of activities she created for children were a credit to the originality that she brought to her work as a children's librarian. The wide variety of programs Louise implemented at the library helped increase readership in local youth exponentially. When she started in 1919, about 35,000 books were checked out by students. By 1940, that number had increased to over 126,000 books checked out by children. The main driving force behind this growth was Louise, despite her modesty. But she did not limit to her work to inside the library. She was the editor of the Junior Pantograph from 1923 to 1926 and filled the pages with her own writing, plus encouraged her student readers throughout Central Illinois to submit their own too. Her writings received national attention as well. A few of her works were published in national magazines and newspapers such as Kindergarten Primary Magazine, St. Nicholas Magazine, the Chicago Tribune, and the Christian Science Monitor. And the work she did with children caught the eye of Jane Cowell, Broadway and early film actress who lauded Louise's work. On a national radio program in New York in April 1945, Cowell said that Louise's poems were, quote, written by someone who knows and loves children and is vitally interested in them, someone who is helping to shape their lives by every book she recommends. Louise retired from Withers Public Library in 1952. While she never married or had children of her own, one can suspect that all the children she taught or met at the library she could have very well thought of as her own. But her retirement from Withers Public Library did not mean she stopped creating or being supportive of children's activities. She continued to be actively involved in the community, writing for children for many more years until her death in 1968. Gertrude Mickey Comau King, better known as Mickey King, the Queen of the Air, this little dynamo rocked the circus world with her aerialistic achievements. She was born in 1905 in Sutton, Quebec, Canada, to Toussaint and Jane Comau. She was one of 6 children born to the couple. When she was young, the family moved to rural Vermont, where she spent most of her formative years. She joined the circus in 1923. Her first act was singing while playing a small drum and dancing. According to Mickey, in between shows, she would sneak over to the big top, crawl up the ladder, and swing in the trapeze. One day, the owner of the rigging caught her, and that was none other than Eddie Ward, world-renowned aerialist trainer. Eddie was so impressed by her strength and fearlessness that he asked her to come back home to Bloomington and train to join his act, the Flying Wards. Of course, she accepted, went back to Bloomington with Eddie, and began training at the Ward Family Training Bar at 1201 East Emerson Street, which later became the Grand Hotel. She married twice, first to Alan King in 1924, who was an animal trainer with the Sells Floto Circus, and later Jimmy McLeod, who was a cowboy circus star. After Eddie Ward unexpectedly died in 1929, she left the Flying Wards. In addition to her own solo acts, she performed with several other acts, including the Flying Valentinos, the Flying Duwards, and the Flying Kings. In addition to performances as an aerial artist on trapeze, she also did her own act on the web and rings, walked the high wire, rode horseback bareback, and performed hanging from her teeth called the iron jaw. But what she became most well known for was the one-arm flange or muscle grind. She added that skill to her repertoire in 1932. It was perhaps the most arduous trick that took special skill and strength to complete. Placed high above the ground with her arm in a loop and her hand holding tight, Mickey would put her feet together and flip her body up and around in circles while holding on with just one hand. Each revolution, her shoulder would nearly pop out of its joint. The difficulty in the trick was the number of times she could hoist herself around to make a complete revolution. Her record was 276 revolutions at one time. Her skills in artistry took her around the world. To recognize her talent, she was featured on the cover of Billboard magazine on November 2nd, 1935. In 1939, she was the first recipient of the Aerial Women's Lillian Lietzel Memorial Award. She performed in several circuses, including the Lees Brother, Sells Floto, Hagenbeck Wallace, the Robbins Brothers, the Shriners, and the King Circuses. According to Mickey, quote, "In our day, we had to learn everything. We could go in and take a chance and do everything and anything that the other guy did, because if somebody got sick, we went in and helped. If we were strong enough to do one thing, we were strong enough to do everything." Mickey thrilled audiences for many years until her retirement in the mid-1960s. She is considered by many to have been one of the greatest aerialists to perform under the big top. Mickey was inducted into the International Circus Hall of Fame in 1987 and spent the remaining years of her life in Peru, Indiana, until her death in 2004. Her sister, Marie Antoinette Concello, is considered the queen of the flying trapeze. Born in 1910, like her sister Mickey, she grew up in rural Vermont after the family moved from Canada. She attended and graduated St. Mary's Convent School in Burlington, Vermont, and earned a scholarship to attend the College of New Rochelle in the state of New York. When she was 16, instead of spending the summer preparing for college life, she made a life-changing decision to visit her older sister Mickey in Detroit, Michigan, who was performing with the Flying Wards at the Sells Floto Circus. It was there she fell in love with the circus herself. She officially began training to perform in the circus in 1927. Antoinette started with simpler acts like swinging ladders, the iron jaw, and posing on webs. She then began to catch aerialists, but what she really wanted to do was fly. That dream became a reality when she met her future husband, Art Concello, who was also a member of the Flying Wards, and he began to teach her to fly. Art and Antoinette married in 1929, and they had one son, Randall. Unfortunately, their marriage was a rocky one, and they divorced in 1956. But they had a long, successful career in between. Flying and somersaulting came naturally to Antoinette. She was fearless. She and Art formed their own troupe, the Flying Concellos, in 1929. By 1931, they were performing with Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, and by 1933, they were the center ring with Ringling Brothers. By this time, she could do a double somersault, but she wanted even more. She wanted to accomplish a feat that no other female flyer had and that very few male flyers could successfully do, to successfully perform the triple somersault. So she began to practice at the Ward Training Barn in Bloomington, which Art had purchased in 1935. Antoinette and her catcher, Eddie Jr., worked hard and trained tirelessly as she attempted to master the triple. The triple somersault is the hardest trick in aerial performance at the time. And while she could do it, unfortunately, she was never able to consistently land the triple every time. The first time Antoinette did a triple somersault successfully in public was at the Shriners Circuit in Detroit, Michigan in 1937. The Flying Concellos became the first act to feature both a male and female flyer that could both successfully perform the triple. And this secured Antoinette and Art's status as stars in the circus. She and other circus stars of the day made brief cameos in the epic film The Greatest Show on Earth in 1915. So I challenge all of you to go watch it and see if you can spot Antoinette as one of the flyers. She continued to perform as an aerialist until 1953 when she retired from flying after 25 years. And she performed with numerous circuses, including Clyde Beatty and Royal Russell Brothers Combined Circus, Russell Brothers Pan Pacific, and again for Clyde Beatty, but she performed most frequently with Ringling Brothers. She continued to work with Ringling Brothers for several decades in a new capacity, that is aerial director, even stepping in for another aerialist when they were absent occasionally. She ended her career in the circus a short time before her death in 1984. And in 1963, she had the distinction of becoming the first living person inducted into the Circus Hall of Fame in Sarasota, Florida. And finally, we come to Eva Gaiter Jones. Though she is little, she is mighty. That is how Eva Jones described herself in the 1948 Apex yearbook when she was a senior at Bloomington High School. And that quote certainly seems to fit a woman who never turned away from challenging situations or tough decisions. Certainly her 3 terms as member of Bloomington's District 87 Board of Education were filled with challenges, both for her as a woman of color and the entire Bloomington community. She was born in Arkansas in 1930 to James and Tommy Lee Gaiter. Her family moved to Bloomington in 1944 when she was 14 years old. After graduating Bloomington High School in 1948, she went on to attend the all-Black Cortez Business College in Chicago, graduating with a 2-year certificate. After she returned to Bloomington, she eventually began a long career at Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Normal. In 1952, she married ISU grad and Springfield native James Jones, and the couple settled in Bloomington and went on to have 7 children. Eva Jones very much cared about young people, especially young members of the Black community in Bloomington Normal. She was heavily involved with youth activities through her church and took active roles in various parent groups associated with Bloomington Public Schools. But she knew she could do more. In 1969, she announced her candidacy for the Bloomington Board of Education. She was one of 2 candidates and the only person of color, one of 10 candidates and the only person of color running for 2 vacant seats. She ran on the platform of bridging the communication gap. She felt that breakdowns in communication were at the root of many problems in the school district. In particular, the growing racial tensions at Bloomington High School that came to a head from February to May 1970. Jones felt that the school board should represent all families in Bloomington. Though she was defeated in April 1970 election, she was determined and ran again the following year. This time was the top vote getter. With this win, she became the first person of color elected to a position on the Bloomington Board of Education, and at that time was the only woman serving on the board as well. Her 3 terms on the Bloomington Board of Education from 71 to 79 came during a very tumultuous era in the history of District 87. Animosity between teachers, administrators, and board members was intense, and it took many years before labor strife eased in the district. She spent her final 2 years on the board as the first Black president of the school board. She resigned her position on the board on April 1st, 1979, because she was pursuing a seat on the Bloomington City Council. She ran for an at-large aldermanic seat and won by a tight margin of just 11 votes. With this win, Jones became the first person of color to sit on the city council. However, in that same election, voters unexpectedly approved a proposition to reestablish the ward system, which meant Jones's term was cut short by 2 years. In 1983, her involvement in local civic and governmental affairs was recognized when she received the Bloomington Normal Human Relations Award. That same year, she was one of 8 people statewide to receive the Illinois Municipal Human Relations Association's annual award. And as you can see, there are so many more stories that we could tell, so many more women, both women in the past, women now, and whoever's yet to come, that we could share their stories of the history that they created here in McLean County. And I leave you with this question before we take questions from people. Who is a woman that has influenced your life? Your mom, your grandma, a friend, a neighbor, an aunt, somebody you don't even know, somebody famous. Think about who a woman is that influenced your life and what impact they had. And so I thank you for listening tonight and listening about all these fantastic stories. And I'm happy to take a few questions.
Thank you, Candace. I will applause everybody else. But right now we only have one question in the Q&A, and it is, what about ISNU and ISU faculty members? Yes, no, it was very hard narrowing down who to include in this talk. And I could have had June Rose Colby, who was a faculty member at ISNU. She was a women's rights activist. There's so many more. So yeah, I've left out so many women. This could totally be like a 5-part program. I mean, really, I could probably do a program on each and every one of these women. I mean, I have on a couple of them myself. So yeah, these could each, it's hard to get them all in there. So that's a really good question. Okay, we had one more pop in. So who is the woman who has most influenced you? Oh my gosh, that's, so I'm a big ancient history geek as well. And I've always been fascinated with Cleopatra, always, like every year we watch the epic movie Cleopatra, even though I know that's Hollywood, but I've read numerous biographies on her. And I just feel like she just got such a raw deal in history, being made out to be this vile temptress who destroyed empires. And I really think she was a strong woman and a story that needs to be revised. So modern times, lots of, great women in my life that have influenced me, strong women who've helped me become, who I am, great teachers in my life too. There's so many I could name. Good question. Well, you have lots of praise and lots of thank yous. One person wants to know, could you identify the women in the last slide that you didn't cover? Oh, okay. Let's see if it'll let me go back. Oh no, let's see. Okay, so I'm gonna try to remember all their names. So Julia Duff is far left. Carol Wright-Tan, first woman mayor of Normal. I've lost some of their names. I want to say that is Matilda Calcote, and then Alberta Duff. Oh, Tori, help me with, I took some of your pictures with me from your Pantograph article. Oh, shame on me. Of course, Judy Markowitz is in there. And she was Dame Fashion Smiles, and I am losing her name right now, but she collected elephants, and that's all her elephant collection in there. And I'm terrible with names right now, and it's so sad of me because these are all women from our history. Helen Clark McCurdy, I know, is in one of these photos here. She was another glass breaking
local politician. So I can definitely get the rest of the names, but yes, absolutely.
So the upper right corner is Helen Rohrabaugh.
Yes.
And then Margaret Chasson is the one being sworn in color in the bottom.
Awesome. Thank you, Tori. I knew you would help me. And yes, Norris, I agree with you. ISU women could be an entire presentation all on their own. Absolutely right. I'm sure somebody at ISU has probably already done that. Excellent question. So more about Lou Brown Sanders Clark. She has an entire oral history that's part of the Black History Project. I don't think that one's on our website, but we have it at the museum and anybody can access it. Plus, most of these women, a lot of them have been featured on the cemetery walk and their biographies are on our website. And if they haven't been on the walk, then they've been in the Sunday column, pages from our past. And so pretty much all these women have something written about them, much longer versions that you can look up. And I'm happy to share links with everybody too, to make it easier, because we'll have everybody's email from the presentation and I can send that out later. And yes, Grace Jewett Austin, thank you for who remembered Dame Fashion Smiles is thank you.
Okay, well, I think that's most of the questions, are actually all of the questions. So real quick, upcoming programs. The next program we have is April 8th. It's a lunch and learn, so it's at 12:10 in the afternoon, and it's Avoiding a Midlife Crisis, the Ecology Action Center at 50, looking back and moving ahead. And then April 13th at 6 p.m. is the next program in our Breaking Bread in McLean County series. And it is Sava Cassava, the roots of Congolese cooking. So you can see information about those and many more upcoming programs on our website and register for them because they're all virtual for the time being. So
awesome. Well, if anyone does have any emails about any of these women, please feel free to email me. I'm going to put my email address in the chat box, although I think most everybody knows how to find me anyway. You can also find out our website. But again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight and helping us bring these women out of history and back into people's memories. So thank you all again so much. And be safe and be well.
good night.
Good night.